Welcome here, everybody. I'm Peter Murray. I'm chairman of the Temple Bar Trust, among other things, and I've been involved in trying to bring Temple Bar back into civic use for last 6 or 7 years, really. So it's really great to see this space in use, and I thought it would be useful if everyone learned a little bit about its rather fascinating and complex history. So I was in Oxfam the other day and I bought this book, The Londoner, which is one of many books which were produced after the Second World War, which were about Britishness, or actually more likely Englishness, really. And I thought it was very interesting that even at that time, when Temple Bar had been removed from Fleet Street for many years, that Temple Bar should be seen as the sort of image of London in that way, which reinforced it as a powerful icon. And it's been a powerful icon since it was built, 1672, designed by Christopher Wren. And it's one of a series of gates into the city. They've all gone, apart from Temple Bar. And interesting enough, Temple Bar is the only one which actually isn't called a gate, because it wasn't a defensive gate in the same way as all the others, but more a ceremonial gate of more later. But a lot of these went in around 1760, when the City of London was doing quite a lot of road works, although there were changes to Moorgate. Moorgate was enlarged in 1472 to allow trained bands to march through with their pikes upright. So it needed a slightly higher arch, and then Cripplegate was sold to a carpenter in Coleman Street for £91 in 1760. Luckily, Temple Bar wasn't sold off that cheaply, and it remained until it was taken down from its site at the other end of Fleet Street in the 19th century. But it started off as a chain. It was located just about where the law courts are in the Strand are at the moment, and there is a monument there which with the city dragon on the top, which shows precisely where it is. And I'll show you some images of that later. But it was 1301 was the first bar, and it was a grant of land to the city which says Extra Barham Novi Temple, which I think is a new bar outside Temple, and which of course separated the freedoms of the city and the liberties of Westminster, those sort of in-between spaces which weren't really a part of the authorities' domain. And after the bar, there was a wooden structure built, and that wooden structure was held the proclamation of Charles II in 1660. And I have to say that when I found this image about Charles being proclaimed at Temple Bar, I didn't have a clue what being proclaimed meant for a king until last September, when, as you can see on the right-hand side, King Charles III is proclaimed in the City of London outside the Royal Exchange. And you can see, the same blokes are still around doing it today. And so in the proclamation, it was described as the old oak gates being shut, the king at arms with tabard on and trumpet before him knocked and gravely demanded entrance. The herald, with his hat on, that's significant, answered, "We are the herald at arms, appointed and commanded by the Lords and Commons assembled in Parliament, and demand an entrance into the famous City of London to proclaim Charles II, King of England, Scotland, France, and Ireland." And the hat bit, we are actually going to recreate that ceremony with the Duke of Gloucester coming to open the gates of Temple Bar on March the 10th this year. So we have the Duke of Gloucester on one side, we have the Lord Mayor on the other side, banging on the gates, open the gates. And so we talked with Mansion House about actually having the pearl sword for the Lord Mayor, and there is a ceremony called the touching of the pearl sword, which again more later. But the Mansion House said, "Oh no, it's not possible for the Mayor to present the pearl sword. That's only the sovereign, the Duke of Gloucester. The best he can get is a doffing of the tricorn cap." So when Duke of Gloucester comes, the Lord Mayor will doff his hat. So after the so this was the timber structure, which was there until it was demolished to make way for the structure which is next door, which was, I say, complete in 1672. Although it seems as though the dates are sort of coincide a bit in terms of the reparation of the city following the Great Fire. In fact, the fire didn't get as far as the end of Fleet Street, so this wasn't demolished. It was just that Charles II wanted something grander and he wanted something more permanent. And so this is one of its more famous images, which actually never happened, because this is the burning of the rumps drawn by Hogarth, where the mob is actually burning rump stakes in protest against the Rump Parliament. Rump Parliament, as I'm sure you all know, was name given to the Long Parliament after Pride's purge of December 1648. And at that time, it was the old Temple Bar and not this Temple Bar, because that was this all happened in 1648. That was only erected in 1672, and actually Hogarth wasn't born until 1697. So it's very interesting going through the sort of images of Temple Bar, that actually artists do take a lot of artistic license when they're drawing it, and it's very difficult to actually work out what happened when, just using drawings like this. But that we know certainly wouldn't happen, because, as I say, 1672 was when it was completed, designed by Christopher Wren, who was appointed King Surveyor of Works in 1669. So actually Temple Bar was the first building which was completed under his authority at a cost of £1,397 and 10 shillings. And it was built by Joshua Marshall, the mason, who was also the master of the Masons Company at the time. So this is a view sometime in the early part of the 18th century, and you can tell of that because it has spiked on top heads and quarters. That was in the days when traitors were hung, drawn and quartered, and so there were quite a lot of celebrated bits which was put up there at various times. One quarter of Sir Thomas Armstrong in 1684, he was led the Rye House plot. That was a plot to assassinate Charles II. Christopher Layer was executed for treason in 1723, and he was a Jacobite, and of course a lot of the Jacobite war was really between Protestants and Catholics, and his head stayed up there for 30 years. Now the thing is that the heads were actually dipped in tar before they were put up there, and that it was a pretty good preservative, really. And but it was blown off in a storm and collected by a lawyer called Rawlinson from Middle Temple, who maintained it as a keepsake. But the last person to be hung, drawn, and quartered and spiked on Temple Bar, this is Francis Townley, and he was executed at Kennington Common on 30th July in 1746, and he was arrested with 8 other officers of the Manchester Regiment of Bonnie Prince Charlie's army, which was coming down to Derby. Stopped at Derby and then went back again because they were worried about the city's trained bands being actually more prepared than they were to beat the Highlanders back. So there was quite a lot of recruitment which happened in Manchester, and 8 of the officers were executed at Kennington Green. Francis Townley said he was very calm and dignified when he was executed, wearing a suit of black velvet made for the occasion by a tailor in Southwark. And he was, as I say, spiked August the 12th, 1746, and there were 2 who were put on top of Temple Bar, and they were the last men in the UK to be hung, drawn and quartered. So Francis Townley was quite a significant Roman Catholic from an important Roman Catholic family, and he actually came from Burnley. This is Townley Hall, his family seat, and his head his head was taken up to his family seat, but the rest of his bits were then buried in old Pancras churchyard, which is one of the few places that actually is reserved for Catholic burial. So this is actually a little drawing done by his brother Henry in 1751. It says, "Here lies the remains of Francis Townley." But that's where his remains were. But his great niece, the children's author K.M. Grant, direct descendant, says that it was actually taken back up to, the head was taken up to Townley Hall, and it was kept there for some time, and it was stored in this hat box, and it was often handed round after dinner with the port as an amusement for guests, until it was then interred in 1945, which I sort of presume that 1945, 200 years after the 1745 rebellion, that they seemed to think there was it was time that he had a decent, or his head at least, had a decent burial. So this is a quite celebrated image of Dr. Johnson walking through Fleet Street, and as you can see, the heads are still on the top. But also you can see the statues on the facade of Temple Bar. So on the west side, the Strand side, 2 niches, which is let's say the south side now. We have Charles I and Charles II in Roman costume. And on the east side were James I and probably Anne of Denmark, who was James's queen. The sculptor was John Bushnell, who died mad in 1701. And this is a slightly sort of weirdly proportioned Johnson outside Temple Bar, which was put onto a series of plates by Dalton, produced in about 1939, just before Second World War. And this is Child's Bank, which was next to Temple Bar. They had an entrance through here into Temple Bar, and they would keep their records, their archives there, including Charles II's accounts book, and they paid £50 a year to keep their stuff there. And so we're going to have drinks up in that room after the lecture's finished, so you can see what it's like now. It's a bit different to that, not so many books, a little bit barer, but we want to give it a bit of character. So I have actually written to the NatWest Bank, who now own Child's Bank, that they might actually like to contribute towards its redecoration. Partly because they were actually in that site next to Temple Bar. They moved there in 1673, and actually they moved out only last year in 2022. you would have thought they would have the sense of occasion just to stay there a little bit longer and do it on the sort of anniversary, really, of moving in, but they haven't. And so we think that actually them helping redecorate the space that was quite important to them as a company to keep that connection with Temple Bar would be a good thing, and well worth them spending a lot of money to do so. But they were very proud of Temple Bar, and you see it sits on their cheques, or it did sit on their cheques, and Sir Peter Hendy, or Lord Hendy as he is now, was telling me not long ago that as a child he had an account at the bank, and all children were given little gold coins with Temple Bar on it as a sort of sign that they had an account with Childs. So Temple Bar was, it had a fairly gory history in terms of the spiked heads and so on, but also it was available for grand events too. We saw the proclamation, but also there was Duke of Wellington's funeral in 1852 when it was decorated like that. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to do that for the Queen's funeral back in September, but we'll try and work out something for the coronation. And this is the ceremony of the Pearl Sword that I was talking about, that ever since Elizabeth I, the monarch entering the city, coming through Temple Bar, is offered the Lord Mayor's Pearl Sword. The monarch then touches the sword, and this was seen for a long time. People thought this was because the monarch had to actually ask the Lord Mayor, permission to come into the city, but actually it's a mark of fealty of the Lord Mayor. The Lord Mayor saying that he will actually look after the monarch while they are in his care. And this is a more recent image of that. This is when the Queen came to the city in 2002 at the time of the Jubilee, and this is Sir Michael Oliver, who was the Lord Mayor at the time, offering her the sword. He's offered it the other way round than Queen Victoria was offered. I'm not quite sure there's any significance in that, but and then this is as a thanksgiving that Queen Victoria's eldest son, Prince of Wales, caught typhoid in 1871 and was dangerously ill, and when he recovered, Queen Victoria thought it was something that should be properly celebrated with a service in St Paul's Cathedral, and so obviously going from Westminster to St Paul's Cathedral, it was seen as the appropriate thing to decorate Temple Bar. So we are looking at excuses for decorating Temple Bar like that now that we have occupancy of it. So there are quite a few things I'll talk about later that do allow us to at least create events that highlight both its history and its significance to the city. So Fleet Street, well, probably most of the streets in London became busier and busier, more and more crowded, and there were lots of calls to take down Temple Bar. 1852, somebody tried, but the Court of Common Council defeated that. But in 1858, it was condemned by the Metropolitan Board of Works as being an obstruction to the traffic. But it wasn't until 30 years later that actually anything happened, until 1887. And I think probably what prompted it was that it was decided that the north side of Fleet Street should be enlarged, and the law courts in the Strand were then constructed. And this is an image while they were demolishing the buildings for the law courts in the Strand. And this is one of the things which, as I say, drawings, very difficult to track exactly the history of the various aspects of the design of it, because you'll see here there is a timber support to stop the arch dropping. And there are suggestions that was in there quite a long time before, so it would have actually been there before they started demolishing the buildings where the law courts in the Strand are now. But that has long been an issue with the arch, that it's quite a shallow arch, and when it was re-erected here, the architects put in some major stainless steel ties to hold it together so it didn't pancake out. And probably it was fairly secure previously when there were buildings either side which held it up. But of course, these days we can't push into other people's buildings, otherwise the insurers would get very upset probably. So this is it being taken down, and they melted the lead, they took off the roof and made this rather nice paperweight, very elegantly cut, and we've got an example of that in the room in the arch. We've got one of those on the wall for you to have a look at. And lots of people thought, well, there are other places where we might put it, and this is a suggestion that it should be seen as an entrance to Middle Temple. And even today, when they go to Middle Temple, the sheriffs of the City of London do go by river and up over the embankment, and this is the sort of occasion where they would normally come into Middle Temple. And so that's one of the suggestions, but it didn't happen. This is where the exact spot where Temple Bar was, a monument designed by the city surveyor, and down below it had some really rather nice little sculptures. This is of Father Time pulling the curtains across Temple Bar, suggesting that it was curtains for Temple Bar. But actually it wasn't, because it got moved to Theobalds Park, and when I said Theobalds Park, and nobody's done it tonight, but somebody at the back there says no, it was Tybbalds Park. So it's either Theobalds Park or Tybbalds Park, but this is up near Waltham, was out in the country, but was a site of the palace of James I, Theobalds Palace, where he used it as a sort of hunting lodge, and it was thought to be fairly appropriate that it should go there because of the James I connection. James I being actually one of the sculptures on the facade, and it was bought by Sir Henry. Again, another pronunciation. It's supposed a lot of people say Muse, so Henry Muse, but it's spelled M-E-U-X. And some people, at least when they were ordering his beer, because he was a celebrated brewer, would ask for Mercs. So you can again take your choice there. And he bought it as a salon for his wife, and up until then, Theobalds Park had actually been closed. It had been in the family some time, but it closed down because his father had become insane as a result of tertiary syphilis. And it was then opened up specifically as a place for social engagement of his wife, who was, this is the house, this is when they combined with the Friary Brewery in Guildford. So again, so what would you say ordering a beer? Can I have a Friary Mercs or a Friary Muse? But anyway, so and this is his wife, who was known as the banjo-playing barmaid, who she was actually thought to have met him in rather dubious circumstances, and one of the things that he wanted to do was try and bring her back into society, or enter into society. So Temple Bar was used for entertaining, they know certainly Edward VII was there, and Winston Churchill, and I'm sure many others. and she was quite a figure at the time. She was painted 3 times by Whistler. The first on the left is in the Frick collection in New York. The one in black in the middle is in Honolulu. But the third one, where she was in furs, was destroyed by Whistler after having a row with Lady Muse. And then on the right is a really interesting chap called Sir Hedworth Lambton. And he ended up as Admiral of the Fleet. But he had also been, 1900, he had led the relief of the siege of Ladysmith. And Ladysmith, being on the coast, it was quite difficult for the Navy to relieve Ladysmith without unloading all the guns from their ships. So they unloaded the guns of the ships, and they shot at the Boers who were holding Ladysmith at the time. And Lady Muse was so impressed by this feat that she actually had some new cannons cast for Hedworth and sent out to South Africa, and that was the start of probably a beautiful relationship, because she died in 1910, but before that she agreed with Sir Headley that she would leave him her estate and the brewery if he would change his name to Muse. So Sir Hedworth Lambton in 1910 became Sir Hedworth Muse, and he became one of the richest men in the country as a result. And he then married the widow of Viscount Chelsea, and his 5 stepchildren inherited the bulk of his estate when he died in 1929. And that's interesting, because it's the stepchildren who then become very important later when we try to get the building back into London. And while he was alive, Sir Hedworth was very protective of Temple Bar, and in 1921 he replied to a letter from the London Society in the Times, suggesting that it should be moved, and the London Society then was supporting the idea that it should be on the embankment. And the Hedworth wrote back, "The London Society shows more than Ahab-like covetousness, for Naboth was offered compensation for his property. I do not believe in the overwhelming desire for its return." And he got his Old Testament wrong, I think, because actually Naboth was actually killed by Ahab, so I don't think that was suitable compensation, but nevertheless it still wasn't returned. And when he died, as I say, the step children then inherited the estate, and Temple Bar was left in the hands of the trustees of the Muse estate. And it's interesting to see what actually happened to it, because by the 1960s or so, it had fallen into a certain amount of rack and ruin. But I just came across, was sent this photograph yesterday, taken in 1954, and you can see here that it still has its roof. The statues are in place. Looks like this window is boarded up, but generally not in bad condition. But fairly soon afterwards, and I think that somebody must have just come and pinched all the lead, and then that started the deterioration that you can see now the roof is beginning to fall in. So this was probably sometime in the 60s. Then somebody did put some corrugated iron over the roof, but they luckily took the statues away, so they didn't get any worse. And so this is a cartoon in Punch about Temple Bar coming back to the city. It says the exile supplanted, or the Enoch Arden of Fleet Street. Enoch Arden was a hero of a Tennyson story where Hardy-like this seaman goes off on his travels and is away longer than his family thought. His wife gets married again, and then years later, Enoch comes back to London to find his family all happily set up without him, and he doesn't admit that he's come back to London so as not to destroy the happy family that he sees. So this is like Enoch, Temple Bar coming back to London, seeing the City of London dragon in its place, and not quite sure what to do about it. So, what did happen? Well, one of the things that is quite important to this, obviously, is the impact of the Blitz of 1941 on this particular site where we are now. So this is the site here, pretty well flattened, the home of the publishing industry up until then, Paternoster Row and so on. And then that was redeveloped to a master plan by Lord Holford, which looks pretty grim in the photographs, and I recall it being pretty grim, I have to say. But Pevsner actually rather liked it, and he said it's outstandingly well conceived, sensible and unobtrusive, inviting to the local employees as well as to the tourists. So, so there we are. I mean, you know, you wouldn't have thought so now, and it of course it had its comeuppance at the time of the Big Bang in 1986, when its floor-to-ceiling heights were too small to accommodate the bankers who were then piling into London at great speed. But now we get to the sort of proper campaign to bring Temple Bar back into London, and Sir Hugh Wantner, who was the Lord Mayor in 1973 to 74, he had a proposal that it should be brought back, sit in front of St Clement Danes up the other end of Fleet Street, and so this was the sort of initial proposal. And Hugh Wantner, he also ran this Savoy Hotel, and so this is him in his mayoral garb. Chap on the left is Stuart Murphy, who was the city architect at the time, and he was the person who was then setting up the Worshipful Company of Chartered Architects, and it's a modern company, so it was only set up in 1984 to coincide with the 150th anniversary of the RIBA. And so Hugh Wantner said to Stuart Murphy, if you can get Temple Bar back into the City of London, you can have it for the whole of your new company. And so he said, jolly good idea. But then Stuart Murphy did actually leave the city soon afterwards, partly because of the changes that were taking place. He was very much a conservation-oriented architect. He wanted to protect a lot of the older buildings in the city. As I say, that was leading up to Big Bang, when at least a third of the city was redeveloped during that period, redeveloped or refitted. And anyway, so there was a proposal that it should be placed next to the Holford development, but just between where we are now, actually, and the entrance to the crypt of St Paul's. And there was a public inquiry set up to look at that, and the great argument was, was it really designed by Christopher Wren? Because Christopher Wren was doing 50 churches, hadn't started on St Paul's by then, but could he really have designed it himself? And I think that Christopher Wren, like many architects, he was the head of the firm, but didn't necessarily design it all, but he was closely involved. And this is from the Court of Common Council, where it says, by this court referred to the Committee for Rebuilding the City to the end they may thereof speedily consider and confer with Dr. Wren. So Dr. Wren was involved in the early discussions. Sir John Summerson had a view as well, and he said that Wren had obviously got the idea from some Pierre de Monte in Paris. You can see this barrel roof there is quite similar to what you would see in Temple Bar, and also the niches with the statues in. And so because this was in Paris, Wren never got beyond Paris, he never got to Italy, so this was seen as perhaps a key inspiration for Temple Bar. And then also in Parentalia, the life of Wren by his son, it said partam urbis vulgo dictam Temple Bar. So we think lots of things which suggest that really he was closely involved with it. But there was divided opinions as to what one should do with it in this particular location. So this is a Holford building here, or Holford master plan rather than his building, Temple Bar, St Paul's, and you can see where it goes here. This is just about where the entrance to the crypt is. And this is not too far off where we are at this moment. But SPAB was against it. Society, the Protection of Ancient Buildings, says once it is demolished, it loses its fundamental interest. Gavin Stamp said if it is to be erected, it should be between buildings of the right scale. And also the Historic Buildings Division of the GLC complained about the difference of scale. But it did receive support from Lord Denning, who was Master of the Rolls at the time, and there was a lot of support and financial support from the American Bar Association, largely through Denning's help, in that American lawyers hold the temple in great esteem, partly because there were these 5 signatories to the Declaration of Independence who were from Middle Temple. So there's a bond there, but we've tried to see if they would support what we're doing, but we haven't had much not the same success as Lord Denning had, not yet anyway. Anyway, as I say, Big Bang really put paid to the Holford scheme because of the inability of the big banks really to utilise those sorts of slab blocks with small floor-to-ceiling heights. And so Stuart Lipton was involved in a competition. They got a lot of Starkitects, so this is a scheme by Richard Rogers, where you would have sort of view coming up from the tube, looking up to St Paul's. Norman Foster covered most of the site with a sort of single structure, and then the Japanese architect Arata Isozaki came up with a rather strange geometric scheme there. But they selected a winner who was Arup Associates, but then the whole thing was rather spiked by the Prince of Wales, or one should go, King Charles III. And he gave the Mansion House speech in 1987, which is known as the Luftwaffe speech, because that was when he said that developers had caused more damage to the city than the Luftwaffe. Surely here, and this is Paternoster Square, if anywhere, added the Prince, was the time and place to sacrifice some profit, if need be, for generosity of vision, for elegance, for dignity, for buildings which would raise our spirits and our faith in commercial enterprise. On such a site, market forces, I would suggest, are not enough. I would like to see architects working with artists and craftsmen, showing that pleasure and delight are indeed returning to architecture after their long exile. This did make the city think twice, but Stuart Lipton ploughed on, and this is the scheme which was designed by Arup Associates, and you can just make out here that's Temple Bar in their drawing there. And one of the problems was that at the same time, the Prince of Wales, working with Leon Creer and Dan Cruikshank, TV celebrity, and also supported by Mirabar Hillel, the property correspondent of the Evening Standard, actually then came up with a separate neoclassical scheme in opposition to this scheme by Arup Associates. And Arup Associates, they later did a very detailed model. Again, you can see Temple Bar there. But at the time of the first public exhibition, Arup Associates felt that they hadn't, at that stage, decided what materials they were going to build the buildings out of, and so they decided to display a master plan made up of perspex blocks. Whereas John Simpson, who had been commissioned by the Prince of Wales, or by, you might say, by the readers of the Evening Standard, as far as the public was concerned, came up with this rather spectacular model, a doll's house, really, of a model, very beautifully put together, and the public were asked to decide which they preferred. And 93% of the public who came to the exhibition preferred John Simpson's scheme. So that seemed to be a fairly clear decision on the part of the public. And but it was felt that Simpson wasn't the right man to deliver a commercial scheme for the city, and so Terry Farrell was brought in, and Terry Farrell commissioned a series of neoclassical architects or traditional architects to come up with a scheme which was very elegantly depicted by Carl Lobin in these oil paintings with choir boys and looking, again, like Simpson's scheme, very attractive to a general viewer. The Farrell scheme also had Temple Bar here. This is the chapter house. The chapter house is the building just through those windows there. Not a very different layout than what we have today. This is Quinlan Terry's building, but the problem was that actually the agents found it very difficult to find occupiers who wanted to move into these buildings. So this was a joint development between Park Realty from New York, Greycoat from London, and Mitsubishi from Japan. And the agents went round the marketplace and found it impossible to find anyone who was interested in taking it, because presumably they wanted to be in more contemporary buildings and buildings that actually had floor plates that suited the modern businesses. So what we ended up with was this scheme with William Whitfield as master planner. William Whitfield he had been previously been surveyor to the fabric at St Paul's Cathedral. He'd been involved with quite a lot of sort of sensitive urban development, and was also a very astute fixer. And he then, like Farrell, got a series of architects to design the buildings on his master plan, but more contemporary architects. And this building by Richard McCormack. Hopkins were the first architects who commissioned for this building, but they fell out with William Whitfield, and Eric Parry completed it. That's now occupied by the Stock Exchange. And now, just to talk a bit about the Worshipful Company of Chartered Architects and their occupancy of the building. This is a photograph of a chap called John Reed, who was pageant master and one of the early masters of the Company of Architects. And I always thought that pageant master was an ancient job, going back to the 14th century or something, but actually it was totally invented by Lord Mays, who was a Labour peer, who was fed up with the rather parlour state of the Lord Mayor's show, actually appointed him as pageant master, and the uniform they wear was totally invented in the 1970s. And anyway, John Reed also, he got a job out of it because Hugh Wantner commissioned him to design the Savoy Grill as a result of that. But he was also, as I say, one of the early masters of the chartered architects. And this is him with his wife Sylvia Reed. Sylvia Reed was one of the first women masters of any of the livery companies. And together they were architects, but they also had rather successful furniture business, which would now be called mid-century modern. And so their pieces sell for high price on eBay, but also Dominic Reed, their son, who is pageant master today, is also runs a business selling their furniture. But the important thing about John Reed is that he designed the badge for the architects company, which, as you can see, has Temple Bar on it. And Sylvia Reed, when she was master of the company, sent round a Christmas card with an image of Temple Bar on it, and the caption was, "And soon we hope that Temple Bar will be the home of the Worshipful Company of Chartered Architects." But that didn't happen for quite a long time. It seemed to get forgotten until I was talking to the senior past master who talked about it. He said, "Haven't you heard this story?" I said, "No, never heard it." And I made some inquiries, and there was no Section 106 about it, or that the architects might take it over. Anyway, so we decided, after a lot of debate, set up Temple Bar Trust to take it over for the architects company, but also create a education centre and a place where we can have talks like this, as well as a place where you can dine in the arch itself. So it took quite a long time to get that going. So we've been in here for getting on for a year now, actually, but half that time was really doing some changes. But we're now up and running. And I found out the other day, which was quite interesting, was a sort of postscript of the building coming back into the city, that I was reading Gavin Stamp piece where he talked about the generosity of Ian Gilmore. Some people may remember Ian Gilmore, who was in the Thatcher government, Lord Privy Seal. And interesting, when you look at him on Wikipedia, his middle name is Hedworth. So Ian Gilmore was actually, his grandfather was Sir Hedworth Muse, or Sir Hedworth Lambton, as was. And in 2003, Ian Gilmore wrote to The Guardian, said, "Unfortunately, it took the corporation a long time to accept that the city is the rightful home of Temple Bar. Until recently, when I handed it over to the Temple Bar Trust, it belonged to me. Shortly after the Second World War, I offered it to the city. Probably any other town, here or abroad, would have accepted it. Some might have even said thank you. Not so the City of London. Even though, because of the Blitz, there were several suitable sites available, and to move it would have cost only £10,000. The corporation merely looked into the matter and did and said nothing. As a result, Temple Bar's return has been delayed for more than half a century." So anyway, it's here now, and our occupancy was delayed for at least 20 years, but now we're in it, and we're looking forward to welcoming people and putting it back into civic use. And David Tudor Price, Sergeant at Arms, writing to the Public Inquiry, he said, "I'm certain that if Temple Bar was brought back to the city, it would attract great interest from all parts of the world. It would also be a source of pleasure to all of us who take pride in the city and are interested in its history." Precisely. Thank you very much. So we've got some drinks in the other room, but if anyone's got any questions now, feel like they'd like to ask it. Otherwise, we can do it over drinks. Yes.
Are the statues of the kings still in their niches?
They are, and they had to be quite substantially repaired when they were put back. In the first photograph, as I showed, they were still there in the 50s. They were then taken down at some stage because they were starting to deteriorate, but they were still in a reasonable state to be. I mean, I think there's new fake stone being put in there, but they look quite convincing. Yes, gentleman at the back.
Clearly, when Wren built it, there were political implications for it. It was a celebration of the restoration. What was the status of the Temple Bar in the time of Cromwell? Do we have any feeling of that, or was it just sort of there?
No, I don't. I haven't come across any particular references, and to a certain extent, the burning of the rumps is the only reference I've come across, and that was. I mean, under Cromwell, it would have been the timber structure, so it would have been quite easy for them to have taken it down if they'd wanted to, actually. But no, but I might dig around for some of that. Yes, it's interesting. So yes.
Is there anything left of the historic interior?
Well, we can see it in a minute, but not much, and we feel that it needs a little bit more oomph, really. So we're working on that when we can afford it.
Mm-hmm. So how much of the building of the gate is actually the original? Did you manage to bring it all back? Or
Yes.
did you a lot, but
Yes. One of the clever things the city architect in 1878 did was to number all the stones. So actually, a large percentage of the stones are original. There are some new ones at the bottom because it was raised up slightly. But yes, the lot of stones are original. As I say, the statues have been repaired. There's a couple of the other statues, small statues, of anew had to be redone at the time of the Reconstruction, and also there's a crest on the front which is totally new. But a lot of the stone is original. Yes. Linda, I think you have.
The really very stupid question, but I can't see how you can possibly move a building. You were talking about numbers, and possibly, how do you, over so many years, actually physically move something and get it right the next time? You see what I mean?
There was a very good set of drawings which the city architects did at the time it was taken to bits first. It took them a long time to take it down without damaging it from Theobalds Park, and there were, I mean, I think, enough records for them to be able to do it fairly convincingly.
Yeah. Do any photographs exist of it when it was in situ in Fleet Street?
Yes, I think.
Can you repeat the question?
Sorry, yes. Are there any photographs of it when it was in Fleet Street? And I'm just trying to think. I think maybe let's go back and. Are they all drawings that I used? Yeah, so that's Linda. That's the drawing of them all numbered. So you can see. So that was pretty helpful. And so I'm going the wrong way again now. Right. No, there are photographs, but I didn't include one there. But I can dig one out.
Yes, I thought 1880s. There would be photographs by then. But yes, as you say. Probably are.
Yes, no, there are definitely photographs, and the photographs are much better to work out what's happening than a lot of the drawings, because the scales are vary so much in the drawings that sometimes you can't see why it's holding up the traffic, and then other drawings you can't see how a single cart can get through them. Anybody else? Yes.
Could you enlarge on what the Duke of Gloucester is going to do? Is he going to hammer on the gates?
Yes.
Or be admitted, or what?
Well, he won't himself, of course. That's not the sort of thing he would do. But yes, Duke of Gloucester obviously trained as an architect, but is our royal patron. So we invited him to open it, and we organised the whole event to be on September the 9th. And then on September the 8th, we got a call from Kensington Palace saying we'd better call it off. And so we did. And then I watched the funeral in absolute awe, because ours is a sort of 25-minute ceremony, and the amount of detail that is involved and authorities and security is absolutely immense. So how they did a whole day of intricate ceremonial like that, and seemingly never put a foot wrong. But anyway, our ceremonial will be that the Duke of Gloucester arrives by car to the north, with the gates closed, and the Lord Mayor and sword bearer and 2 sheriffs arrive to the south, and the beadle will then bang 3 times on the gate and say, open up or something. And we will have a guard of pikemen, trumpeters and drummers, and then the gates will be ceremonially opened, and then there'll be a couple of speeches. And as I say, the Lord Mayor, the best he's allowed to do is to doff his tricorn hat to the Duke of Gloucester, and then everyone comes upstairs for a drink, really. That's about the measure of it. But the interesting thing is that we actually had to get an engineer's report whether we could open the gates at all, because they are pretty hefty, and if they'd gone a bit loose at the hinges, it would fallen over, could have flattened somebody. And so Baxter's, the engineers, came and had a good look at it for us, and they actually said, well, you ought to be opening it every few months, really, just to stop the hinges seizing up. So we're trying to convince the city to give us permission to do that. So far, we have to get a licence every time we do it, which we have to get that through the city solicitor at the cost of £1,200 a pop. So that's not very helpful at the moment. We're hoping we might negotiate it down a bit. Good. Well, if there are no more questions, there are drinks in the other room. You can actually see the interior of what at the moment is called the Temple Bar Chamber, but if NatWest Bank come up with lots of money, we'll call it the Child's Room.